It's hard to believe it was almost 2 years ago, I think it was 2 years ago, that my friend and filmmaker and director and writer and activist Michael Matucci interviewed me in my own apartment. And we did this kind of at the last moment. We were on our way to an event actually where I was going to film something, and he wanted to capture an interview with me that he was going to use in a documentary he's making. So I said, sure, and we sat down and we filmed it really quickly. And Michael knows me very well. He asked me a bunch of questions that took me by surprise at the time. And because he's such a dear friend and such an amazing documentary filmmaker, I felt like I had to answer the questions, and of course I did. And so I wasn't ready to put that out there until now. You know, we all have to be ready to tell our stories, and I believe that we tell our stories in varying degrees depending on where we are in our journey. And this one really was a difficult one for me. So enjoy this video, and I'd love to hear from you. If you have any comments on your own journey or any questions about my journey, I'd love to hear from you.
You characterize your work with film and camera and videos?
Film and camera and videos has been an exercise in recovery. It really is what it is. You know, I've got a history and a story of trauma, and I got to a place in my life where I needed to deal with it and work through it. And I found that video was a good way. Would you sit in front of a video camera and look at it and talk and say something and watch yourself back? You see yourself for who you really are. Your mannerisms, your maybe if you're insecure or you know, comfortable with yourself, and when you see or even just listen to yourself, it changes you. And so video has really defined who I am, as I've been able to look at myself directly in the privacy of my own camera without putting it out there publicly, which I do now because I love it. I saw how awkward I was without really knowing who I was as a human being. And now that's different. If I seem awkward, now I don't care, because it's just part of who I am.
What about the content itself? What's driving you? What impels you as far as the content?
So I've been doing video for 2 years now, and originally it was just telling my story, right? I'm a survivor of childhood sexual abuse, and I never thought in a million years that I would put that out there on social media for the public to see. But I decided that it was something I wanted to do. It was something I felt called to do in a sense. And it brought meaning to my life to be able to have the guts, to be able to talk about something that happened to me without shame, without fear, and knowing that there was going to be a benefit for somebody else out there that would hear it. So I just felt like being bold and putting content out that would be interesting and exciting and maybe something that people haven't seen in that space. And I'm talking specifically about trauma. I felt community and getting my story out there and just really getting relief from the shame and the fear of it, and then seeing other people get that as an effect, an offshoot of what I was doing.
What would be a message you could send around trauma specifically? Help people understand from your standpoint, to give people perspective of why this is important and why you would be talking about it to the total novice years and years after you were a child?
Well, I think the biggest revelation to myself and to other survivors I've talked to, it has so much shame and fear around it. And I think the first thing is just knowing that I wasn't alone. So the things I was dealing with, and we talked off camera about the things in my life that have been issues and part of my journey, but just to know that is not out of the ordinary. It's not uncommon. It's a shared experience. And when you find out that you're not alone and you can be safe and tell your story, that's the really those two common factors of being able to know that you're not alone and being able to tell your story, to me is the fundamental steps of getting out of the self-destructive habits and dysfunctions that plague your life because of carrying this without dealing with it.
And can you choose whatever aspects you choose to? It's more about help people understand what that looks like make an equation. So if I were to just make something up, this situation happens undealt with, it can manifest in this.
Okay, yeah, I know where you're coming from. So, and because you alluded to that in your first question about, now you're an adult and how it's affecting you now. So what's the connection between when you were a child? And you hear this a lot in the news and in the media, where women mostly, is what we're hearing, they make claims that something happened to them years ago and now they're dealing with it. And there's speculation as to whether they have an agenda behind that or why is that happening now. And when I went through my lawsuit, when I sued the school board who hired the teacher that sexually abused me for 2 years, when I dealt with that, they asked me, how can you bring this up now? It's so many years later. And I was very direct in that response because I knew the answer to that. And the answer is that later on in life, events can happen that trigger neurological pathways in your brain that you were completely unaware of on a scientific and physiological level. That triggers your brain. And when I shared my story with you, that's what happened when I began to share and talk with other people and began to move into being open about my story. It brought open the floodgates of trauma into my mind that had been sitting there for years. And now that I look back on it, and survivors will tell you this, you can see the paths of unhealthy and destructive habits or dysfunctions that were and addictions that followed you and directed your life all the way along, and it came from when you were a child. And in addition to that, when you're ages 0 to 3, 3 to 6, 6 to 9, and 9 to 12, when you experience sexual abuse, it impacts your brain. And it inhibits your ability to mature in your thought processes and to mature as a healthy human being, and so you find yourself coping as you get into later on in school. If this happened when you're young in high school and you get into the adult world, you find yourself coping and using, doing things that are to try to make yourself feel normal, because you just don't feel normal all the time, and it's because your brain has been physiologically affected by the trauma. And then again, so you carry that all your life. You get triggered, and you're like, wow, now I see why I've been the way I've been.
Can you just make a list, whether it happened to you or not, like from what you know to other people? It's like coping mechanisms include. Just so I can get people to make that connection easily. We're talking about coping mechanisms.
So coping mechanisms and dysfunctions, I put them together sometimes. Like for example, I was highly performance oriented. What that means is I was trying to achieve things in life through my career or my personal life or anywhere in my life, try to do something to gain somebody's attention or to get them to think a certain way about me, to get them to, it's a very manipulative method, or it's a very manipulative way of living, because you're coping with a hurt and a pain and an emptiness inside of who you are. So you are pretending to be something that you're not, is what ends up happening. So that's where codependency comes in, where you are relying on the other person to give you a sense of importance and that you mean something, right? And it has nothing to do with who you really are. And then there's coping mechanisms like drinking or pornography or sex or work, or just anything that you use to just to calm yourself and to bring a sense of peace and order into your life that is unhealthy. And it can be things like work or even being addicted to relationships. It's not always just drugs or sex or alcohol, right? It can be many other things, but everything is to mask and hide an emptiness that you have inside of you that you've carried your entire life. And what do you do with that? You don't just drop it and say, I'm okay. But that's what we do as adults later in life. It's like, well, I'm okay. I mean, I've had this all my life, until you really understand that what you're doing is unhealthy and it is a dysfunction and you are actually coping.
So can you tell me, so how do you change the shame game?
That's really tough. It is really tough. Is you have to, this is where, with my nonprofit, MeToo What Now, I came up with the tagline: find yourself, live yourself, give yourself. And to me, those are the 5 steps of trauma recovery put into my own words. But you have to talk about it, right? You have to talk about it. It doesn't mean going on camera. It doesn't mean standing on stage. It doesn't mean even going to it's anybody that you trust and feel safe with, to be able to tell them something you've never told anybody before. And I think we all have areas in our lives that nobody knows about. That's part of our human nature. I get that. But I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the shameful things that you either have been done to you or that you have done as a result of the things that were done to you that nobody knows, that you've been hiding. And so once you step into that, and once you bring light, I call it's just bringing light into your life and realizing that, again, you're not alone. Mm-hmm. That's what opens up our minds and our hearts to be able to receive healing from life that is due to us. And I don't know if that sounds kind of out there, but I mean, that's really what I mean, right? And so talking, and then the reality is there's a process for it. You need to, getting in community. I thought, oh, this is great. I have talked about it and I'm open about it. But I don't think I need group therapy. I thought, I don't need that, because I'm really doing well. So even in the process, I thought, this is great. I am really progressing. But when you learn to stop in the moment, and that's another exercise that comes out of dealing with shame and telling your story, is you stop and you think in the moment, am I really okay? And then I realized, there's more work I need to do, and maybe I should check out a group therapy session to see how that goes. And when I did, I was like, I attended for 2 years. It was like the best thing that ever happened. That's where I found out I really wasn't alone. It was an amazing place to get healing from, and I made friends of my group that I'll have forever. So it's a progression, but it begins with talking, it begins with sharing your story, and then take a proven mental health path to recovery, which, in my opinion, for most people, it's going to involve mental health therapists and group therapy and understanding the different techniques to overcome mental health issues.
You said something on the phone, Pioki, talking about the connection, the root between sex buying and then what's really driving that, or what could be driving that.
With what?
With sex buying. With prostitutes.
Oh, with spending my money on prostitutes. What is driving that?
Yeah, you would help people understand what that comes from.
Yes.
Yes, I'm sure that there's some people who are coming from a sexual, lens exclusively, but that's often maybe changed, or like, how do you describe that panorama to help people understand why people go in and do that?
Yeah, and that's a huge question, because for me, I was awakened very young sexually, right? I was age 4 by my grandfather. So when that happens, and back to what I mentioned earlier in our conversation, was at that age, neurologically and physiologically, your brain changes. So I became used to sex really young, not understanding it at all. And so for me, it was natural to want more of it. It was because for me it was attention. It was love. And I know that sounds weird, and that's when you hear the boys from the Michael Jackson case talk about, and it frustrates me a little bit when people don't understand. But I understand that they don't understand. Is that if it was a love, why are you bringing it up so many years later? Well, it's because you didn't know it was wrong, right? And you didn't know how it was impacting you. So for me, that created a sex addiction that followed me through my entire life, and I just kept pushing moral boundaries in my life. Every time I did something new and different in that area. For other men, I mean, pornography and sex can be an addiction, and you may not be sexually abused as a child, but it's like any other drug, right? It puts massive amounts of dopamine into your brain at one time, and it's like getting a shot of heroin, and so you get addicted to it, and so men begin to live an undercover lifestyle. And when I traveled and worked all over the United States, Canada, and Europe, I would always run into men that were doing this, right? Because it was an addiction. Whatever brought it on, whatever was the root of it, once you're in the cycle of addiction, you're in it, and now you have to get out of it. And for me, it was compounded by recovering from the effects of childhood sexual abuse and dealing with an addiction at the same time. So if you have a normal upbringing, but you just got yourself into it, you just have to deal with the addiction side of it, which still isn't easy. It's not to downplay it, but.
What would you say to the people who are working to set a demand and saying, hey, we just have to, these guys were caught buying prostitutes or whatever, we can just arrest them or educate them and then, have them, that's our thing.
Yeah, I think, I spoke once to a large crowd of about 1,000 people that were raising awareness in the local community here in Denver about child sex trafficking. And for me to stand on stage and realize that I was the person that they were against, and I get that, you have to be against, you have to stop the Johns. But it was a horrible, horrible feeling. And I couldn't really read from my notes. I couldn't really, I lost my prepared speech because what am I going to say to these people, right? Here I am, I'm the idiot, I'm the bad guy. But I had to say, here's the thing. I believe that no man is born wanting to do that. Right? No man steps into that world of buying sex and paying for sex full of confidence and no conscience. Right? Like, hey, I'm going to go to a baseball game. This is great. You don't have that kind of a feeling. You're walking into dark areas. You know, right, that this is not good, and you do it anyway. But whether it comes from it came from somewhere. Something happened to that little boy that caused him to go down that path. And I believe that they need attention and they need to be understood. They need the shame and the fear lifted from their lives as well. And they need a program to understand that, hey, you know what? I want to get out of this as well. And I mean, dealing with the shame of being sexually abused as a child is a completely different shame than saying, hey, I've been involved in this lifestyle, and there's no excuse for it. What am I supposed to say? I'm doing this because of this. We can't. At some point in my recovery, I had to realize that I had to take responsibility for my actions, and I could no longer say, "Oh, it's because I was sexually abused as a child. That's why I'm doing all these horrible things." At some point, you have to say, "I have control. I have to decide as an adult that I'm not going to allow the actions that I take today to be a cause or a reason for what happened to me back then." And that is a tough place to get to, especially if you're in that world, in that lifestyle, because you keep it hidden, man. You keep it hidden. You don't want to be found out. You're not going to admit to it, right? So finding those men, right, and is a whole different story, and getting them to see that, I know your soul, your heart is breaking inside with what you're doing. I know that you feel crushed by what you're doing. Because we hide it and mask it so well.
If you had one message to send to everybody, what's your message to send?
My message is the importance of getting outside ourselves and being in the moment, in our surroundings, wherever we are. For example, when we go into a coffee shop, I find that before, when I wasn't at a stage where I am now in my life, I would be so in my head, thinking about what I needed to do and where I'm going. And if you look at people in coffee shops and places that are public, they're so busy on their phones and what they're doing. And we're not aware of the human beings that are around us and how little time it takes to do something, say something that can brighten somebody's day just a little bit. And that's the message, is to be less inwardly focused and be more outwardly focused on people around you.